Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to go over my top 10 Genesis rental games. So it's hard to imagine now, but at a time, EA used to make and publish some really amazing games, and both Mutant League games are examples of that. This one's Mutant League Football. It is an amazing game, and it thankfully had a remake, so go out there and try Mutant Football League. Thankfully, they put the letters and the words in the right order on that one. This is an over-the-top arcade game, which is just so much fun to play. Think NFL Blitz before NFL Blitz, and that's kind of what you have with Mutant League Football. We did the football game, now let's talk about the hockey game. This is actually the one I prefer of the two Mutant League games. It's so much fun to play, but it can be such an annoying game at times because it's really hard to score, or at least it is for me. What's really great about this is, like the other game, you can just kill the other team to win. But as you can see, there's also like holes in the ice you can knock your opponents into. The crowd will actually throw weapons onto the field, like chainsaws, flails, and broken bottles. It's just such a fun game to go through and just beat the shit out of the other team. That's actually how I've won most of the games, is just by killing off the other team. My friends and I rented a lot of boxing games and a lot of sports games for the Genesis, or Mega Drive, whichever one you want. But this one was probably the game that I have the most memories with. Evander Holyfield's boxing. This one was great. You basically have a career mode with a boxer, and you fight your way through it. Over the course of it, you can sort of upgrade him, so there's a little bit of like a pseudo RPG element to it. This was a pretty deep boxing game for the time, and it was way better than that awful Buster Douglas's boxing. That one was just crap compared to this. It also does try to do like a 3D boxing ring type thing, which works fairly well. Overall, it's probably the best boxing game on the Genesis, in my opinion. Beavis and Butthead on the Genesis was one of those games I remember renting a lot, but I don't really remember us getting very far. A friend of mine named Eric would rent this at least a couple of weekends in a row back when Beavis and Butthead was absolutely huge back in the mid-90s. And I remember playing it, but not really liking it as much. So this is an example of one of those games where I have some fond memories of playing it, but I don't really remember much about it aside from just, the fact that it looked like the cartoon. We didn't know what we were doing. We knew what we were supposed to do because the game's pretty good at that, but we had no idea how to go about beating this. Splatterhouse 2 was one of those games where it felt like we weren't supposed to be playing it, especially since we were pretty young at the time that my friend Joey rented this, and we weren't really allowed to watch horror movies, or at least I wasn't. I remember seeing a few of them just by accident, but it was never something where we were supposed to be watching it. I also remember thinking that the main character was Jason Voorhees. I had never seen the movies at that point, so I just didn't know. And the main character wears something that looks kind of like a hockey mask, or at least it did to me when I was playing this. And he sort of looked like the version of Jason that I remember from, the different commercials and that sort of thing. So yeah, this is an absolutely wonderful game that I'll have to go back and do a more thorough review at some point. Yeah, we rented an awful lot of sports games, and NHL 94 was one of the better ones that we rented. It seemed like my friends Joey and Eric, they rented a lot of awful sports games that I cannot remember, but the NHL ones I remember quite fondly. I think we also rented some baseball stuff. They rented so many sports games that it's hard to really keep track of them all, but there are a few that stand out. and NHL 94 does, just because of how great of a game it was, and honestly how close it was to Mutant League Hockey. Team USA Basketball is one of the many basketball games that we rented, but it's one that I remember not because I enjoyed it, but because of the Olympics that year. This was around the time of the Dream Team, and I remember, McDonald's had this weird giveaway where you could get a basketball, like an Olympic basketball, or like a very patriotic one, like a red, white, and blue basketball. If anyone remembers that, they can probably clear it up for me. But I remember playing a whole bunch of different games that were centered around the Olympics, and this just happened to be the one that I remember the most. My friend Eric rented this, and I remember enjoying it back when I was a kid, and then coming back and playing it now. I think it's kind of shit. But that's just one of those things where like my nostalgic memories don't match up with the reality of what the game is. I also remember a very different tournament, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles tournament fighter game than what the one I played was. I think we probably just had a game that had more things unlocked with it or something like that. But when I went back and played this, it just didn't quite feel right. But I still have memories of playing it when I was a kid. It was a very strange experience. Earthworm Jim is one of those games where honestly, it kind of blends in with a lot of the other platformers at the time, but it does have spectacular animation, and some of the sound effects are okay. I remember renting it with a few of my friends, mostly Joey and Eric again. I don't remember liking it all that much, but I do remember playing it when I was a kid. I don't know, it's one of those weird instances where you remember renting a game, but you don't remember much about it aside from like really the animation and sort of the cartoon show and the rest of the media that was attached to it. Maybe that's just my experience with it. This is the game that I remember the absolute most from renting games when I was a kid. I love Phantasy Star 4. It was the game that got me into the series. It made me really want to go get a Sega Genesis because I was getting really into RPGs at the time. And I spent a while trying to convince my best friend at the time, who was a diehard Super Nintendo fan, that this was just as good, if not better, than the RPGs on the Super Nintendo. I don't think I ever convinced him, but it really is just such an amazing game. My friend Eric rented it first. We played the hell out of it. They didn't really know what they were doing, and it was one of the rare times where I was like, oh, I know exactly how to play this game. So I remember playing it with Eric and Joey. Then Joey rented it, and I remember playing it with him. And then I remember playing it on and off throughout the years, just because it's such a spectacular game. This is honestly the best RPG on the Sega Genesis, and it's probably one of the best games on the Sega Genesis. It is so much fun, and I really wish Sega would bring this back in some way. The Sega Genesis was one of those systems that I remember so much when I was a kid. I did not own one when I was growing up. It wasn't until high school that I got a hold of it. And I also remember playing some of the different ROMs on an emulator. I could not tell you which one. It's been way too long for me to remember that. I mostly remember the system for a whole bunch of sports games and a handful of platformers that are mostly just not all that memorable or anything like that. I also remember an awful lot for NBA Jam because that's just how I first experienced the game, and I played it so much with my friends back in the day. It was not a rental, though. My friends actually owned that one. That's why that didn't end up on the list. There are probably a lot of other games that we played that were probably better than some of the others on this list, but I just can't really remember. Like I said, there were so many basketball, football, and and hockey games, and also baseball games, that they all just sort of blended together, and only a handful of them stood out, and of that handful, most of them were kind of shit. So that's why maybe not a lot of the memorable ones made it on this list, just because I either didn't play them growing up, or I did not enjoy them all that much. So that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I would love to hear about the different games you rented for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. I will talk to you all later. Bye.